Hello, everyone. This is the Engineering Politics Podcast. In today's episode, I go through the origins of our divided politics and culture we see today. And although the beginning of this podcast is a bit bleak, I do end with proposing some uplifting solutions, so try to manage your depression. I swear it will get brighter at the end. This podcast is based on an article I recently wrote titled, Divided We Stand, A War of Thought. In this article, I dove a bit into philosophy, religion, and economics to explain why our tendency to blame all our cultural and political woes on divisive political figures is a bad start on the road to recovery. We must first look how we contributed to the mess we find ourselves in today. Don't worry, I'm not going to tell you to go check your privilege or anything, mostly because that's an empty phrase, but I will ask you to reflect on how you can help heal the cultural climate. But before we move on, let me get through a few plugs real quick. There are many ways you can engage with the Engineering Politics content, including YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, ThinkSpot, and now Parler. But the best way to engage with and support this content is through the Engineering Politics Locals community. You can become a member of the Engineering Politics Locals community at engineeringpolitics.locals.com. You can become a member for free, and you can also get a 3-month free trial for subscriber access using promo code EPFREE. That's spelled EPFREE, no spaces. This will get you full access to the content library, ability to post your thoughts, ideas, and commentary directly to the main feed so you can interact with the community, and gain access to subscriber-only content. After the free trial runs out and you still want to be a subscriber to support this content, you can pay as little as $2 per month to keep your subscriber access. And I'll go through this in a bit more detail at the end of this podcast. But that's enough of that. Let's get to what you really came for. This is the Engineering Politics Podcast. I normally don't find it useful to use words like war in a context outside of their explicit meaning, especially when they should be reserved for harsh and violent actions they depict, but we aren't in normal times. Our politics have always been a blood sport, more or less, but now it almost exclusively results in each side standing their ground and accusing the other of being evil. But is this sour discourse and bad faith debate inherent in the politics, or is it just a symptom of an underlying cause we tend to ignore? I have a few thoughts on why it is the latter claim. Let me start by making my own claim that will turn most people off to this podcast entirely. President Trump is a symptom of division, not a cause of it. Let's sit with that for a moment, and I swear I'll get back to that claim at the end of this podcast. Okay, now that basically no one from either side likes me, let's continue. There's a common theme to many of the articles I write and podcasts I make. This theme is taken from a popular quote from Andrew Breitbart saying, "Politics is downstream from culture." This is the main reason why I believe the culture has gone corrupt, which is manifesting itself in our politics, especially considering politics is just the study of people at its simplest form. We've been dividing ourselves as a people, highlighting our differences using arbitrary characteristics like race, well before our politicians decided to weaponize inequality and injustice based on these characteristics. And because this conversation went into the political sphere, we now find it convenient to blame politicians rather than look at our own behavior. I know this to be true because I've done it myself. It's a hard thing to recognize your faults instead of blaming the symptoms on others. There's a story in the Bible that teaches us to look inward at our own faults before condemning others. Now, I'm sure not everyone listening to this is an avid reader of the Bible or a believer at all. But the Bible is a collection of stories meant to teach how we ought to interact with the world, and the teachings are useful whether or not you're a believer. In the Gospel of John in chapter 8, there was a woman who was accused of adultery, a sin punishable by stoning. The people condemning the woman for this grave sin brought her to Jesus to affirm this condemnation, but Jesus said, "He that is without sin among you, let him cast a first stone at her." In the end, there was no stoning because no one is without sin. The lesson from the story is we must be able to challenge our own sins and flaws before going around condemning everyone else. The famous Rule 6 in Dr. Jordan Peterson's book 12 Rules for Life and Antidote to Chaos goes through the same idea by stating, "Set your house in perfect order before you criticize the world." Perhaps if we practice this a bit more, we would find real solutions to our cultural problems. But that doesn't completely explain why we are where we are today, but it does set us on the right path. Since we're on the religious theme, we might as well look into the secular religion of Woke-ism. The religion of Woke-ism uses the same mechanisms as a traditional religion to dictate a new set of moral standards. The death of God left a vacuum to be filled with a secular ideology to serve as our moral compass. Woke-ism, which has its roots in Marxist philosophy, is a belief that social hierarchies are mechanisms of oppression. This is why wokeism demands ambiguity between the sexes, a critical rethinking of the justice system, the complete dissolve of the nation-state, and the elimination of free market capitalism. All these structures naturally result in some sort of hierarchy where the people on top, the oppressors, stand on the shoulders of those on the bottom, the oppressed. Throughout modern history, one of the obligations of those who we consider the left is to tear down hierarchies, which is not always a bad thing. In fact, this role has been one of the most important responsibilities fulfilled throughout human history. Opposing this role has traditionally been an obligation of the right, who defended hierarchies because hierarchies are naturally occurring in human and even animal behavior and do serve an important role. Hierarchies do become rigid over time and they must be knocked down before they become corrupt. But knocking them down prematurely while they still serve an important purpose to society is harmful as well. For more information on what social factors and personality characteristics that predispose, but not predetermine, the individual to embracing a more left or right political stance, I highly recommend Jonathan Haidt's book, The Righteous Mind. I would go into more detail here, but that would add quite a bit of length to this podcast. Dr. Jordan Peterson explained in one of his many talks the differences in understanding of the left and right in the American context compared to the European context. I bring this up because hierarchies play the main role in this difference. Dr. Peterson explained the American context of left and right dive more into specific issues like economics and the view of freedom over equality, or vice versa. He goes on to explain the European context has more to do with the roles I explained before. The right builds up hierarchies and the left knocks them down. This is the balance between order and chaos, and we must always have a little of both. Using this understanding, I find the most likely cause of the corrupt culture we are seeing today is a combination of these two theories. 1. The left has knocked down almost every relevant hierarchy, good or bad, using their power and influence in media, entertainment, and education that has resulted in them building their own hierarchy to fill the void which they refuse to acknowledge. And 2. The right must now take up the traditional role of the left in knocking down the hierarchy built by the left, but the right has no idea how to do so. This is why the typical arguments given by the right, fact and logic-based arguments from conservatives more specifically, have not slowed down the spread of wokeism who don't rely on facts or logic. And this is also why the right, who associates themselves with the Republican Party in the U.S., nominated a lifelong Democrat like Donald Trump because he understands the language of the left. Just like the right attempting to fill the opposing role, the left is also struggling to regulate their own hierarchy because that is not a role they are used to filling. You see this in the volatility of acceptable behaviors allowable under the woke moral system. This is why a woke idea of today is a racist idea of tomorrow, and conversely, how racist ideas of yesterday become the woke ideas of today. No one is sufficiently far enough left if their ideas and worldview don't continue to trend further and further leftward. Yet we see influential figures and large corporations virtue signal and adopt these far-left ideas. We see this because wokeism has established its own currency. I explained the idea of social capital in my article and podcast titled The Free Market of Ideas. Social capital is the accumulation of social value that can be used at a later time or spent on self-fulfillment. And much like monetary capital, there are different forms with varying value in each marketplace. Think of traditional social capital, or the trade of trust, shared values, and social reciprocity, as the gold standard. This is considered the gold standard because it has the same basic value in each marketplace. Think of treating others with respect to trade for more respect in return. It's not always a perfect return on investment, but most cultures recognize this exchange of social goods. The new wokeism currency being bought and sold now is what I call woke capital. Woke capital is more similar to counterfeit currency. Counterfeit currency doesn't always lack value as long as the person trading for the currency still believes it holds value. but it's not tied to any definable value, making it extremely volatile and devalues real currency. This woke capital volatility incentivizes behavior like cancel and call culture because of its demands on destroying hierarchies while building one up at the same time. This is why large corporations like Starbucks buy woke capital by supporting causes like Black Lives Matter or BLM in the hopes of earning more support from the woke crowd, but then still get accused of oppressing others by participating in the evil capitalist system. They are praised for a short period of time for their virtue signal, but then torn down because their woke capital has plunged in value after it's exposed for being counterfeit. This also devalues real capital, or social capital, by harming the core value exchange, which is trust. This is because it has no real value, but corporations and talking heads are still buying, hoping they never get canceled. As we can see from the long list of people who have had their careers and personal lives hurt or ruined by others digging into their past and finding dumb things they said when they were young, especially when they get their first chance to climb an established hierarchy, the cancel and call out culture will come for everyone eventually no matter how woke they present themselves that day. This is how we create instability and start to really harm people. It starts by going after those who openly oppose the ideology, then moves to the people who do not believe hard enough, and then finally comes for the revolutionaries of the ideology themselves. As described in Alexander Solzhenitsyn's The Gulag Archipelago and George Orwell's 1984, when the leader of the successful revolution ends his speech and it's time for the crowd to give their applause, don't ever be the first person to stop applauding. The real question is, how do we fight this? We can't fight this using facts and logic alone, as I briefly stated at the beginning of the podcast, because wokeism does not recognize facts and logic that don't affirm the religion. This is also why the right has such a hard time fighting against wokeism, because the main tool of the right is citing books filled with facts and figures laying out the necessary trade-offs to promote freedom that will lead to prosperity. But that's not always a compelling argument to a person who is constantly told they are being oppressed. Many cultural and political commentators believe you must fight the emotionally charged language of the left with more emotionally charged language from the right. But this will only serve in amplifying the emotion of both sides, which is never a good way to solve a problem. The best way to make the cultural shift we need to strike a balance between order and chaos is to expose the underlying illness causing the symptoms. This illness is lack of meaning. It's easy to lose the meaning of life when we grow up so comfortable with the lives we have now and only find meaning in our own happiness. Every adult knows they cannot always be happy, but they can be in a perpetual state of shifting accountability so they can blame their lack of happiness on someone or something else. This is only natural if we come to the conclusion that meaning is only tied to happiness, fairness, and prosperity. The world has no obligation to make you happy. The world has no obligation to be fair. The world certainly has no obligation to fill the hole in your life with riches and prosperity. This is not what meaning is meant to be. Meaning can be derived from purpose. The English philosopher John Locke referred to the pursuit of happiness in his book titled An Essay Concerning Human Understanding. This concept was later used by Thomas Jefferson in the Declaration of Independence. Some people take this concept as happiness being owed to them, almost like an entitlement, just for living and breathing. This is not the point Jefferson or Locke were trying to make. The purpose comes from the pursuit of an end goal, like true happiness. Jefferson makes a point that life and liberty are prerequisites for that pursuit. Happiness just given to you with no pursuit is just imaginary happiness. It's not sustainable. Imaginary happiness is just a sugar rush. The pursuit is what gives purpose, which yields meaning. Bringing meaning back into our lives will fill the void that is currently being filled with the volatile nature of wokeism. So, the solution is to go to Antifa protests and hand out the written works of John Locke, right? Not quite. Many illnesses, especially considering how much this illness has infected the culture already, can take some time to treat, but that doesn't mean it's not treatable. Taking back some of the institutions used to spread the word of wokeism is the first step to spread the antidote of meaning. Supporting anti-woke journalists, entertainers, and professors and defending them against the woke mob will help in this effort. Finding ways to talk to people of opposing views and explain what gives you meaning in your life is another great way to spread the message. By creating a counterculture that treats people with respect and values their opinion is the best way to fight against cancel culture, as long as those opinions don't fight against the liberty of others, meaning we should still call out real racism. Leading by example by showing what gives you meaning is an effective way to make this cure contagious. It will take time, but we must persist. I hope by now you can reread the claim I made at the beginning of this podcast and understand why I made it. President Trump is a divisive figure to most, but he didn't cause the corrupt culture we see today. And I'm not using this podcast as a defense of the president. I have plenty of disagreements with his policies and actions, but public figures like President Trump and even President Obama shouldn't be the accountability shields we desire to deflect blame. We must take inventory of the mistakes we made that contributed to our current cultural climate and learn from them, not weaponize the mistakes of others. The only way we can rebuild the cultural fabric of society is accepting our mistakes and moving forward united. United we stand. Divided we fall. This concludes this podcast on the War of Thought. And as I said at the beginning of the show, I want to take a quick moment to share different ways you can help support this content. There are a few easy ways to do this. You can follow me on Twitter at ENG_politics. You can also give me a follow on Parler at Engineering Politics. You can join the Facebook group named Engineering Politics, where I share and discuss content with the Facebook community. You can also subscribe to my video channel on YouTube under the channel name Engineering Politics, where I make videos using this podcast audio laid over different graphics to create a better overall podcast experience. I'm also active on ThinkSpot, which is a discourse-generating application that promotes intelligent and honest conversations while discouraging the trolling and nonsense found on most social media platforms. You can find all of my podcasts and videos there as well. But the best way to interact with me, get my newest content, and support this podcast is the Engineering Politics Locals community. I talked a bit about this at the beginning of this podcast. This is an amazing community that goes far beyond just a membership platform intermediary for creators. It allows the followers of this content to get together and discuss the newest articles, podcasts, and videos in one place. I strongly urge you to join the Engineering Politics Locals community at engineeringpolitics.locals.com. You can become a member for free, and now you can get a 3-month free trial when becoming a premium supporter if you use the promo code EPFREE. That's spelled EPFREE, no spaces. I would love to have your support with your subscription so this content can remain independent and keep growing. Monthly subscriptions to the Engineering Politics Locals community start as low as $2 per month. I hope I can count on your support so I can start making higher quality podcasts and eventually live videos. I appreciate your consideration. Let's build a community together. Thanks for listening. This is the Engineering Politics Podcast. None of the persons, podcasts, books, or other references other than engineering politics used in this work directly reflect my ideas and/or personal beliefs, nor should they be held accountable for anything said during this podcast. Thank you for listening.